Chopin's childhood, his earliest childhood and youth in Poland. And I put together a few images. Leslie's going to help me with that in a second. It's such an interesting family. His father was French. And when he was 16 years old, he left France and traveled 1,000 miles east to Poland. It turns out in the northeast corner of France, there was a huge Polish community. They had all been emigres from some previous war. And this was 2 years before the French Revolution in 1787. The 16-year-old boy was invited to go to Poland with a rich Polish family and be a helper, to be a factotum, an administrator of certain estate duties, financial things. And what he ended up being was the French tutor to their children. And he got a reputation as a wonderful teacher. So he became a professional French tutor teacher. He was transferred to another estate in a small town about 60 miles west, I think, of Warsaw, called Żelazowa Wola, and I had to practice that. And that's where Chopin was born. He was, by that time, he was a confirmed bachelor in his 30s, and there was a Polish lady there who was kind of an impoverished relative of the estate owners, who they kept on as a housekeeper, and she was family, but she was a poor relation, and she was a spinster. And they met and they married. And this was a very happy marriage. Justyna Krzyżanowska. And they had 4 children, 3 daughters and 1 son. And the one son was Frederick, and he was born in this little town. And now, Leslie, if you can show the opening photos. We've got 4 or 5 pictures of Chopin's birthplace in Poland, this little town, which has now become a shrine, and not just a Polish shrine, but a worldwide, global shrine, even though he was only there for the first 7 months of his life. He left there when he was a tiny infant, and his father was offered a better job in Warsaw. So going ahead, okay, let's go. Can you advance? Next one. So that's today. That's the chapter heading for today. Here we go. So look at the map of Poland. You can see where it is in Europe. It's sandwiched between Russia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Prussia. And these were its 3 traditional enemies, and they were constantly fighting over it and dividing it up and partitioning it and grabbing territory. And Chopin was lucky that in his first 15 years of his life was a kind of a peaceful time, this little town. Let's go to the next one. There's a picture of the house, and it had already become a shrine in the 1890s. You can see people gathered there, and there was a big ceremony, and an obelisk was raised, and Balakirev came and played a nocturne that was an Opus posthumous piece. And if you go there, you can visit, but realize he left this house when he was 7 months old, okay? And the next image shows one of the inside, one of the outside. In the list of videos that I recommended you check out on YouTube, there's one of mazurkas, and that is a wonderful video. It's produced by a Polish company, and at the end, after showing you what a mazurka is and a professional dance troupe doing it, they go to this room, and there's a grand piano in this room where Chopin was born, and a guy is playing a Chopin mazurka on the grand piano in this house, which is quite touching. Okay, and I think that's it. Okay, that's it. So then they moved to Warsaw. He was 7 months old. Let's go to the next one. And Warsaw at this time, this is 1831. Actually, they moved there, of course, in 1810. Is a medieval walled city. You can see that red jagged line. There's a brick wall that goes all the way around the city, and then on the southern border is a river. So it had some natural protection, and the inside city center core is gorgeous. Keep going. There's a university, there were palaces, there was a lot of wealth and a lot of culture. There was an opera house, there were theaters, even ballets. And so as Chopin was young, going to high school in this town, he attended all the up-to-date operas. He was up to date with all the music and the theater and the literature of the time. It was extremely lively, and it's because there was this peaceful 15 years window of quiet time. Let's see. One more. The next slide shows the Saxon Palace. This was the first place they lived when his father got the job as the French tutor. They had to leave after a while because Warsaw was under the command of the younger brother of the Tsar, and he decided he liked the Saxon Palace a lot. He would rather move there because of the parade ground, because he was crazy and he had soldiers and he had them marching up and down that parade ground 24 hours a day. Sometimes till they just dropped from exhaustion. Unfortunately, the whole thing was destroyed in World War II. So then they moved to another place, the Kazimirtz Palace. And by this time, Chopin, he had started music lessons with his mother when he was 4 years old. He begged and he cried when he heard music. And his older sister, Ludwika, played. And so he imitated everything that she did. And his mother found that when she tried to teach him something new, he already knew it. So by the age of 6, she decided wisely that this was too much for her, and she hired a professional teacher, Wojciech Żywny. He was a real character. He was from Bohemia. He was a 60-year-old violinist who had formerly been a court violinist somewhere down in Bohemia, some minor prince, and that job dried up. And so he came to Warsaw, was trying to teach violin. He's basically a violinist, but there weren't enough students for violin only, so he started teaching piano. And he was teaching Ludwika and Frederick. At this time, he came to the house for lessons once a week and became very close with the family, often stayed for dinner, often included in family holidays. He was a bachelor. He loved snuff. They said his waistcoat and his jacket was just covered with tobacco and the dust, the white dust from the snuff. But he was a passionate disciple of Bach and an excellent teacher and not rigid. And he did not put Chopin on the typical at that time kind of industrial mill of exercises like Czerny exercises and Kramer exercises. Chopin figured things out by himself. He was brilliant, and he improvised constantly. And Żywny encouraged him in this, in composing and improvising. And the backbone of his teaching was Bach, the 48 preludes and fugues of the well-tempered clavier. And Chopin learned these so early and so thoroughly that later, when he was teaching in Paris, he could sit down and play 14 of them from memory for a student. This was recorded in the memoirs of one of his aristocratic lady students. She was astounded. Her lesson, I guess she wasn't ready or something, and they got on a sidetrack, started talking about Bach, and he started and couldn't stop. So he played consecutively from memory 14. That is astonishing, and that is one of the pillars of his education and of what became his musical style. The composers he loved were Bach and Mozart. He didn't think much of any of the contemporary composers except Italian opera. He loved Italian opera, the bel canto, and he attended every opera that he could. I have a piece. Yes, I have a piece. When he was studying with Żywny, when he was 7 years old, he'd only been with him for 1 year, he composed a little polonaise, and it became his first published piece. He performed it in public, and he got the attention of the Russian, ruler of Warsaw at that time, who was kind of a bipolar monster, the guy who marched the soldiers up and down in the parade ground. He went into rages and could be brutally abusive and just furious. And his wife would call for Chopin to come play, like David playing for Saul, and they would send a coach with 4 black horses in a row, Russian style, abreast, to come pick up this little boy and take him to the Saxon Palace to play for this Konstantin Romanov guy. And it would calm him down. And then when he was calmed down, he also had a son, and there were some young preteen children there, and Chopin was allowed to stay and play with them and play in the garden and become kind of a regular. So also from a very early age, he knew how to navigate in the world of court etiquette. He learned all the proper forms, how to bow, what to say, when to be silent, when to respond, what the titles were, and his manners were exquisitely refined. And all his life, he had the manners of a prince, even though he was nobody so far as birth and rank go, but because he had the manners of a prince, he was treated like a prince. And Poland had this proud history, aristocratic history. So first, before I play you his 7-year-old Polonaise, I'm going to play you a Polonaise by a Polish general. His name is Michał Oginski. This was a generation or two before Chopin. He was a national hero. He was a general, and he was a highly educated man. He was in the grand tradition of the Enlightenment, that he knew sciences and art and music. He could draw. He composed music. He even composed an opera. So this is his Polonaise, and it's one of the most famous, most beloved pieces in the Polish repertoire. It's called Farewell to My Homeland, because at one point he was exiled. He had to leave after one of these wars where he opposed the Russians and they won, so he had to go to Constantinople or someplace else to wait it out for a few years. So this is his Polonaise, Oginski's. Imagine if all our politicians had the educational depth to know science and music and art and be able to write music like that, as well as be statesmen and great generals. So that was the culture he came from. I mean, Poland was a backwater. It wasn't Paris, but it was highly cultivated, highly developed in terms of its education and literature and the arts. Now, here's our brilliant 7-year-old. I can't imagine if his feet were even, if his legs could reach the pedals. He was a shrimp. He was only about 5 feet tall as an adult. So as a child, brought to play, for the scary Russian dictator of Poland, this is what he had. And it got everybody's attention, and he was suddenly a star, a media star, and they said, this is the Polish Mozart. not bad for 7, 7 years old, 1 year with a professional teacher, and producing music like that. So everybody knew they had a real genius on their hands, and it's astonishing. I mean, if you think, what would you do if one of your children showed those kinds of abilities? You know, you would try to give them every opportunity. But the brilliant thing about the teachers he had was they didn't force him into any strict mold or any strict curriculum. They just let him teach himself and explore and try and experiment. And so he developed a completely unique style. The piano language he created was an amazing mixture of Bach, counterpoint with beautiful inner voices, constantly inner voices, and Mozartian kind of simplicity and elegance, and the bel canto ornamentation of Italian opera, plus Polish nationalism. You'll see I have a Polish flag behind me here, especially for today. They were patriots through and through. They were all about hoping for the day when Poland would be an independent kingdom or even republic. And there were many attempts to achieve that, but never happened in his lifetime. So we have our genius 7-year-old. Next, Leslie, take me to the slides. As he was getting older and was no longer homeschooled, he was first in the Lyceum and the Kazimirtz Palace, and the family had a wonderful apartment in a same big institutional type building where the school was. So all the school classrooms and the teachers lived in this building, and they had a big enough apartment that they could board half a dozen of the boy students. And this was a source of extra income for the family, which was really important for them, because I don't think as teachers they were paid that much. But everybody was together in this wonderful, huge building that had classrooms and concert halls and family apartments. And the boys that boarded with the family became Chopin's lifelong friends, 4 of them. You'll find their names appearing in his letters starting from about the age of 12, 13 and till the end of his life. 4 of them were his dear friends. So that was a really warm time. They ate together, they boarded together. So it was a very one big happy family kind of thing. Next picture, and you can see that's the historical image. There was a new teacher after the age of 12. They decided, okay, he's ready for the next teacher. And Joseph Elsner, was German, but he was had become Polonized, very patriotic. He was a very prolific composer. I mean, hundreds of works, operas and masses and symphonies and chamber music and all kinds of stuff. Basically a composer, not a pianist. And as he went to this high school for music, he didn't have a piano teacher. They decided there was nothing anyone could teach him, but Elsner taught him composition and guided him. And most of those early big works, like the first sonata and the La Ci Durem variations and the first other works for piano and orchestra, were created under his supervision. He had an amazing technique. They would take a famous classical piece and reduce it to a kind of blueprint map. Say, okay, we're in the key of F major, the tempo's andante, it's 3/4 time. Here's how many measures, and here's the harmonic scheme. So he would copy of a known work's skeletal frame of harmonic change and rhythm and tempo and key, and then give that to the students and say, okay, you fill this out, flesh it out, make some music out of this. And then they would compare it with what Mozart or Beethoven or someone had done. So it was a really brilliant way to teach. And Chopin was constantly improvising. He could not sit at a desk and write music. He had to do it at the piano. So his father got a second piano. They had a beautiful grand piano in the big salon of the apartment. Let's see, let's do the next one. Next image, please. So that this is what it is today. If you go and visit today the Kazimirtz Palace, this is where they were. And at the end of the building, see on the upper left there's a plaque. That is Chopin's head, and beneath it a plaque saying that he lived there with his family for 10 years, from 1817 to 27. And that building survived World War II. Okay. Next image, there is a nice sketch of Chopin age 16 by a friend who saw him play during the summer holidays. He was invited out to their estate. Okay, and one more, the family portraits. This is Chopin's family. Now, sadly, by this time, you notice there's only two sisters. The younger sister, Amelia, who was some kind of literary genius, had died of tuberculosis. She coughed herself to death. And the summer before she died, the mother had taken both Frederick, who also was suffering from TB, and her to a very expensive spa, Bad Reinhardt, in Germany for 5 weeks. But this was actually probably one of the worst decisions she ever made, because people with TB, very advanced cases of TB, went by the hundreds to these spa resorts, and so the risk of reinfection was very high, and a lot of people died there. They had to have special facilities to handle the number of people who died at the spa. So they went, they spent the 5 weeks, and then Amelia died the next spring. So there's Isabella and Ludwika. And Ludwika, his older sister, was probably the one he was closest to. And he had a wonderful correspondence and friendship throughout their life, and she was present at his deathbed. She came from Poland to be with him when he died. His father also died of TB at the age of 44. So Amelia died at age 14, the father at 44, and then Frederick at 39. Okay, next image shows their salon. Against Krasinski Palace again today, and a nice engraving from 1770. This was very nice living, very highly refined. All the comforts that civilization could give you. I mean, even if you're thinking without running water and toilets and kitchens. I don't know how they managed all of that. They must have had a lot of staff. Okay, next image. I'm trying to get to the one of their there we go, the apartment. This was done later. Chopin is not there. That's the parents and the two sisters who are left after he went to Paris. But you can see at the end of the room a nice big grand piano against the windows. And it was in this room that they had many very splendid musical evenings, big evenings, and Chopin would premiere his new concerto or his new pieces, and they would invite all the people, the teachers from the school and his friends and a few influential people from outside, and they would have concerts in this room. And in addition, Chopin had a room up above, a little attic with a spinet piano that was his own special man cave, where he could go and compose anytime that he wanted to and be in seclusion. So that was a very supportive, very wonderful way to encourage his talent. Let's see. That's the piano. Okay. I want to play some more music for you. So now I'll show you a mazurka. He had this, the school years were in Warsaw, in this very urban, very intense, intellectual and academic environment, but in the summers, they went to the country. He was invited to various friends' summer homes, and they had pianos. And he also got to go out in the country and hear the peasants doing the harvest songs, or a wedding, or just making music at the end of the day. And every summer he was exposed to this. And so he began to write mazurkas from a really young age, 14 or 16 years old. And he wrote 60 of them throughout his life. And these are not mazurkas to be danced to. A really fine scholar said, you have to think of these as mazurkas about mazurkas. But they're delightful, and it was an act of national pride. It was an act saying, I am a Polish patriot, this is our identity, we're intensely proud of this. And it became a craze. When he went to Paris, he started a whole mazurka craze. The characteristic of the dance is it's in 3, and the accent is on the second or the third beat, not the first beat. So whereas a waltz is a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. A mazurka is 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2, 3, and sometimes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, with a syncopation. So it's very different. And then there are modes. There are these Mixolydian and Lydian modes, which give it that wonderful Slavic, je ne sais quoi, different kind of a feel from something that's just in a major or minor key. So here's a really early one. It has the strong second beat, and there's a wonderful episode with a drone, because these were sometimes played on like little klezmer bands with bagpipes and a fiddle and maybe a clarinet or a concertina. So there would be a drone, and you can hear that in the middle section. It goes into a mode, and then the drone part in the left hand. can see why they became so popular, and they're so fun to play. So all of his students, they were begging for his mazurkas, and he often gave them as gifts. He would give a manuscript as a gift to special people. As he got close to graduation time from the high school for music, the assignments got bigger and bigger and bigger. And Elsner very likely assigned him to create the variations on La Ci darem la mano in the summer of 1827. So he started in June, and he kind of worked with it over the summer holidays and here and there and the other. And when he finished it, it was an amazing, amazing tour de force, kind of new thing. He loved Mozart, and he knew the operas so well. There's a wonderful performance of that duet that I suggested you watch on YouTube on the handout sheet of the La Ci darem la mano duet. So he took this tune and created a set of virtuosic variations on it. And you can hear in this, he's under the influence of Italian opera with the kind of expansive adagio ornamentation of the melodic line, and Bach with the incredible inner voices and complex counterpoint, and always something going on linear, not just vertical, but always linear, beautiful inner lines. And Paganini. Now, the violinist Paganini was just touring Europe at this time, and people thought, that he had made a deal with the devil. First of all, he was sick. He was pale. He had syphilis. He was being treated with mercury, so he looked like a ghoul. His skin was white. He dressed all in black. He was thin as a rail. But he could do things on the violin that no one else could do. In a way, Chopin became the Paganini of the piano, as did Liszt. They were both fascinated with this and the creation of new patterns and new techniques and whole new language for the piano. And Paganini came to Warsaw, and Chopin was just bowled over. He said it was absolute perfection. And his teacher introduced him, sort of took him backstage and said, this is my very special student, Frédéric Chopin. So it made a huge impression on him. In the arts at that time, there was kind of a war going on between two factions. One who were saying, well, is music really music when it's still just virtuosic display? If it's just endless pattern making and circus tricks? And the other said, yeah, that's not music, that's something else. That's the circus, that's entertainment. And the other one saying, no, but music should have beautiful sound and soul and wonderful melodies and development. So you realize this is the 19th century this virtuoso school, which is sometimes called the flying trapeze school of playing an instrument, because there were so many just technical tricks and not much, what I would call music, but just kind of, grinding it out like pasta, all these patterns. So there's some balance of this, but it's very virtuosic, this thing. And he copies some tricks of Paganini. There's one variation that has these huge leaps, as Paganini could do spiccato bowing. And so Chopin was trying to imitate this kind of leaping, jumping kind of technique. And then, of course, at the end, he has to turn the theme into a polonaise. So it ends with a polonaise finale. There was a wonderful review of this piece by Schumann's father-in-law, Frederick Wieck, who caught up with it a few years later, after it was published almost immediately. By the way, Clara Schumann learned it when she was 12. It's very funny, and she wrote in her diary, "This is the hardest piece I've ever learned in my whole life." She was 12 years old. But she learned it, and she played it as a solo piano piece on her concert tours in Europe. And her father was so proud of this that he began to claim that it was Clara's performances on tour that made the piece famous. And that did not please Chopin. He also wanted to write a review. He did write the review in Kassel, in a newspaper. And this is exactly the kind of thing that Chopin loathes, because it's about program music. Now, program music means giving music a definite, descriptive agenda, right? It's telling a story with specific images and specific actions. And the 19th century composers, this started with Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, with the Pastoral, or with Vivaldi's Four Seasons. There's always been program music. But Mozart was really all about absolute music. There's no, describing a clock or a dog running around or the church or a battle, a naval, listed all these pieces about battles and St. Francis walking on the water, talking to the birds. Everything had to have a heavy visual program image to support it. Chopin was a throwback to Mozart and Bach and absolute music. He said no programs. He never gave those kind of descriptive titles to pieces. You think of Schumann and the Scenes from Childhood. Everything has a very specific image. Not for Chopin. So when Frederick Wieck, Schumann's father-in-law, wrote this review, it both annoyed him and made him laugh. He thought it was hilarious. So it's so wonderful. I want to read it to you in its entirety. This is reported in a letter to his friend Titus Wojciechowski, to whom the La Ci Durem variations are dedicated. It's Chopin's Opus 2, and Titus was one of those boys who boarded with the Chopin family for several years while they were in high school together. So he's writing to him, because he's the dedicatee of this work, he has a special interest in it. He says, Chopin writing, "A few days ago, I received a 10-page review from a German in Kassel who's full of enthusiasm for them, the variations. After a long-winded preface, he proceeds to analyze them bar by bar, explaining that they're not ordinary variations, but a fantastic tableau. Speaking of the second variation, he says that Don Giovanni runs around with Leporello. In the third variation, he kisses Zerlina while Masetto's rage is pictured in the left hand. In the fifth bar of the Adagio, he declares that Don Giovanni kisses Zerlina on the D flat. Plater asked me yesterday, where is her D flat to be found? I could die of laughing at this German's imagination. So that's just an absurd exaggeration, distortion of program music. But anybody can do that. You can imagine all kinds of things. But Chopin was not about program music. He was about absolute music. But you will hear virtuosic, you will hear Bach, and you will hear some Paganini and some Mozart in there. So I will not play the whole thing. It takes about 20 minutes to play, but I'll play you excerpts from all the bits so you can get the sense of the work. And then I hope you will go listen to it online. There's some really beautiful performances available on YouTube. that's enough of that one. That's the Paganini style jumps. And then he modulates to an Adagio. And then it goes on and on. There's a wonderful coda. It's just irrepressible, joyful energy of this 17-year-old showing his stuff, showing off what he can do. It's just the most fun piece to play. Did you all catch the D flat? You'll have to listen to it again to see where Zerlina is kissed on a D flat. Okay, well that made a huge splash, as you can see. Got published And then he went to Vienna and was invited to play on the summer holidays. He was just impromptu, the publisher said, you should really play this. So they arranged 2 concerts quickly, and he performed it in Vienna and made all kinds of wonderful connections. Composers and friends of Beethoven realized this is 1827, 28. Beethoven and Schubert both just died. And so the giant Beethoven is kind of hovering over everything, especially in Vienna. And Chopin was welcomed. He was welcomed as the young genius, and what can we do to help you? You know, people were just wonderful that first time. He went back home. He had another year, and he was trying to figure out what to do. He wanted to do maybe a 2 or 3 year trip, go to Italy as the source of, because especially he loved Italian opera, but to travel through the Germanys and Italy and France and England and meet all the musicians and play concerts and learn as much as he could. And they asked for a grant for this, and they were denied. And the official word came back, well, we don't think grant money should be used for this kind of a purpose. So ironic, because they were giving money to other people for artistic studies abroad, and here's the single most famous Polish composer who represents the whole country now. But he had to amend his plans, and he took about a year to do it, and it was hard. He's very indecisive. He always procrastinated and was indecisive, so he had another year at home, and meanwhile he was in love for the first time. She was a singer that he had known from the Warsaw High School for Music. Her name was Konstancja Gładkowska. And they had performed together, and he had admired her from afar. He saw her perform bel canto arias in theaters, but he kept it secret. He just kept it all, for the first 6 or 8 months, he kept it in his heart and never even approached her. He was so shy. And then finally he did, just, shortly before he was leaving, and they exchanged rings, and they, of course, nothing happened. They weren't even officially engaged, but at least he declared himself how much he admired her. And when he wrote the F minor concerto, the second movement is, in a way, dedicated to her. It's all about her, and all about him being in love with her. So when you listen to the F minor concerto, please listen to that gorgeous Adagio movement. It's weird. The F minor concerto was composed first, but published second. So there's this confusing thing. It's called Concerto number 2, but it really was the first one that was written. The second concerto, the E minor, he wrote during that last year when he was getting ready to leave. And that is a magnificent piece. And I would like to play the Adagio movement from that for you. It's one of the most beautiful examples of his synthesis of bel canto and his own special piano language. And the other thing you have to remember, Nocturnes, of course, Nocturnes. Chopin is known for his nocturnes, and you have this idea of him as only a composer of dreamy minor key, weepy music, weak music, but that is so far from the balanced truth. There is music of incredible strength, heroism, and rage, and patriotism, and playfulness. There's a full spectrum there. You will never get to the bottom of the Chopin well. However, since he's so famous for the nocturnes, let me give you a little short course. They were invented by the Irish pianist John Field. He made quite a splash. He wrote these, then they're very simple. And so it was calculated marketing in a way, because by now this is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and the rising middle class, and there are tens and tens of thousands of young ladies in every city taking piano lessons as one of their accomplishments. Right? They had to sing and draw and play the piano and do needlework, and so playing the piano, these little pieces were just custom made. So he got very rich and very fat, and he ended up in St. Petersburg as the official court pianist at the Russian court. So he came through Warsaw, and Chopin met him, but he wasn't impressed. He'd come across the music in a music shop. They had these wonderful stores where you could go into a private room in the back with a piano and take the scores that were there on offer, the newly published music, and try it out on a piano. So most likely, this was the first place that Chopin would have encountered the nocturnes of John Field. So let me play a little excerpt of a John Field nocturne, and then the very first one that Chopin wrote. This was a work without published posthumously in his manuscripts because he didn't consider it good enough to publish during his lifetime, but it's exquisitely beautiful, and it has all the characteristics of the Nocturne. So first John Field, and then Chopin. like water for chocolate, the difference between John Field and Chopin. And that was written when he was 17 years old and was very nearly lost. He had it in his papers at his death, and he clearly gave instructions 3 times, please destroy all the manuscripts, all the unfinished, all the sketches, all the fragments, destroy these papers. And the guy who was helping with the closing up the estate and all the papers, Fontana, was one of these high school friends that had been a boarder at his home in Warsaw. And he didn't, thank God, he didn't destroy the papers. So we have pieces like the Fantasy Impromptu and this Nocturne and another Nocturne and many other pieces that would have been destroyed, some of the most popular waltzes. So there's Chopin pining away for Constantia, trying to decide what to do, and finally made the decision, okay, I'm going to Vienna, and maybe I don't know, be there for months, maybe a year, I don't know, and then we'll see when I run out of money what I can do, but I'm launched. And so he left in November of 1830, and 3 weeks after he left, Warsaw erupted with an attempted coup, this uprising, and the Russians crushed it brutally, as you might imagine, and many of his friends, many of his high school friends, ended up being imprisoned. Some were killed, and anyone who had been suspected of collaborating, meeting in a coffee house, complaining about the Russian government, was on a list, and there were Russian secret police all over Europe, and so Chopin had to be careful thereafter about traveling, because he was an exile, and he had been connected with some of these people who fought. When he was in Vienna in 1830, the guy who he dedicated the Opus 2 variations to, the La Ci Durem variations, was with him. They had planned to go together and spend some time in Vienna and get established. And then when the uprising happened, he immediately left and just took the next day, went back to Warsaw to help out, to fight the Russians. And Chopin thought, well, maybe I should go too. And so he started out, and then he realized how ridiculous that was, because as weak as he was and sickly, he would just be a burden on any of the people who were trying to do something of the resistance. So he stayed in Vienna, but he was brokenhearted about that. His last big concert in Warsaw before he left, there was a grand farewell. He played the E minor concerto and some other things. And then his friends from high school and his teacher, Elsner, went to the stagecoach departure station and sang a special piece the teacher had composed to sing him on his way, including lovely Constantia was there and all his high school friends. And so it was he had no idea that he was leaving forever and would never come back. He had no idea. So now let's see. I would like to play for you the Adagio movement of the E minor concerto, which is it's one of my favorite things in the world, I have to confess. It is so beautiful. And you will hear the influence of bel canto and of Mozart, and you'll also hear Chopin's unique voice and unique language of the keyboard. That is Opus 11, still a teenager. This is a sketch, manuscript sketch, was in possession of the Morgan Library in New York. And it's just random doodly stuff, but they're all little bits that came out of the finale of the variations of La Ci Durem la Mano. And you can see he's just thinking and he's trying things out, looking at patterns. He signed it, his name there at the bottom, and he doodled this wonderful doodle of the, looks like some 18th century figure, you know, with the epaulettes and that thing on the left, a pedestal, maybe Mozart. Since this was on a theme of Mozart, and he probably had Mozart on the brain, he created his own monument to Mozart. But you get an idea of the precision and the playfulness, the obsessive detail, this pursuit of perfection, just by looking at this page. There's a lot of information there.